Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Titan A.E. from 2000. Titan A.E. comes out at a kind of interesting time in mainstream kind of Hollywood animation, in that it's after the Disney Renaissance and before Pixar and DreamWorks and kind of more CG animation studios really took over. Pixar was obviously already going on at the time. This was released in June of 2000, but it was before you had DreamWorks, Blue Sky, Illumination, and countless others making CG films. And it seems to be this interesting little window where bigger studios are doing riskier and kind of different animated projects than they had before. Clearly they knew the Disney Renaissance, and doing an animated film with music and all this stuff wasn't necessarily going to work in the same way it once did, so they actually tried out different things. A month before this film came out, Disney's Dinosaur would be another example of that, and it's kind of more of an experimental time in terms of animation. Basically what happened is 20th Century Fox had this script that had been bouncing around forever. It was for a while called Ice Planet, and actually spent $30 million developing it, and had people like Ben Edlund, who's the creator of The Tick, and Joss Whedon work on the script while it was still a live action film. And then after spending $30 million and working with a director who I keep reading is called an undisclosed director. I'm curious who this undisclosed director is, but they're undisclosed, so I don't know. If anyone can I couldn't find out who it was. I can guess maybe it's Wolfgang Peterson or something. I don't know, Paul Verhoeven, somebody who knows how to do special effects in the late 90s. Spielberg, some guy I forgot who nobody cares about anymore, like Wolfgang Peterson. It didn't work, and they realized they wanted to make it into something. And most studios, when they spend a lot on development, will actually just like push a film through just to like kind of save face with the boss or something. And so they decided to make Titan A.E. an animated film and use Don Bluth, who had just come off the success of Anastasia working with 20th Century Fox, and they felt like this would be an interesting place to take their animation department. It wasn't, because this bombed like real bad. Like they stopped making animated movies like a week after. They were like, this shit is closed down because, whoa, that's a thud. And it did very poorly, despite actually opening in a lot of theaters. It opened in more theaters than the movie that was #1 that weekend, which was a remake of Shaft, which is pretty laughable. But Shaft seemed to be getting more of the pop culture zeitgeist. I don't think Titan A.E. really got that, unfortunately, for this movie at least. It ended up being Don Bluth's last film to be released theatrically, and really his last feature-length movie. And it kind of shows the end of this kind of interesting phase in big studio animation where they'd make different kinds of movies, like Dinosaur, which actually was a financial success, Titan A.E., which completely bombed, and they kind of moved on from there. But it's interesting to look back and think of the possibilities people and mainstream studios had with animation, and when they were possibly taking it, and actually see an animated action adventure film be widely released and had a lot of money spent on it, even if this movie isn't actually that great. Planet Earth, and it is destroyed by these aliens because they're evil and we're on Earth and stuff. That's all I got from it. The planet's destroyed, and then 15 years later, this guy who was a kid then and saw his father go off in this spaceship, the Titan, which flew off from everyone else while all the other Earthlings escaped. And now he is like working on a kind of trash freighter by himself until suddenly another guy comes, played by Bill Pullman, and tells him that he is like a friend of his father's. And wow, this sounds more and more like Star Wars now I'm describing it. I did not see that as much while watching it, but it's clearly there. I mean, I knew a little. There's definitely some Star Wars shit in there, but the ring that his father gave him before his father left genetically lights up a map on his hand, which probably also causes cancer. But they use this map to find this Titan ship because it will magically make a new Earth somehow, and be able to find a place for humans, because humans are dying out in the galaxy because they don't have a planet, and I guess people don't like them for reasons that this movie never gets into. And you kind of hope that these characters will find the ship and bring Earth back and bring humanity a new home and bring humans their prominence once again. I've always been interested in this film. I've never seen it until before I did this review. I had heard of it for a while because when I was a teen I was into The Tick, I was into Buffy, and so the idea of Ben Edlund and Joss Whedon writing a script together, or having both been given the same script that they both wrote on, or being credited with writing the same movie movie, I guess is the best way to say it. Interested me, not interested me enough to see it, mostly because this movie was marketed with music that even at the time was like super lame. Like they used Creed, which there was ever a way to get 17-year-old me, or really me ever, to not see a movie, put Creed in the ad. I find it interesting that it's trying to do a darker thing and trying to be an action adventure type of sci-fi movie as an animated film, and that's cool, and I really respect that kind of thing on a hey you did it kind of level. But the storytelling in this is super bad and very unclear, and despite having people like Ben Edlund and Joss Whedon having written it, and Joss Whedon doesn't really like this movie. They asked him what's his favorite joke of his entire career in a Reddit AMA, and he actually responded with Titan A.E. And I don't think many people look on this film fondly. I can kind of understand why, because there's no real connection with the characters. There's parts in this film that feels like characters just randomly, things happen to. The character that Bill Pullman voices just randomly turns into an evil guy and then turns back, and you're like, I mean, sure. Despite Don Bluth being very good at using character in films like The Land Before Time and An American Tail, and he's very good at like developing a character, and you almost feel like you're kind of watching like an indie movie sometimes in terms of just letting you be alone with these characters, particularly in The Land Before Time. Some of those scenes can feel quite intense. Titan A.E. doesn't have as many slow moments with the characters, and when they do, it's at points where I'm like, what? Shouldn't I have had this at a point which would have sort of mattered, like that would have maybe worked a lot more? And Titan A.E. never really does that. It never really develops in a way that I'm really following the characters, never gives me moments alone with it. It does the kind of typical bad movie thing where I feel like I'm watching a really shortened down cut of a much better movie, but you don't like the cut down movies, so you're like, I mean, if there is a director's cut, I'm sure it would be better, but I've wasted enough time on this. There isn't a director's cut, and it doesn't get much better. There's kind of interesting ideas, and one interesting idea that they refer to a couple times is the fact that these aliens that are trying to kill them and stop them from getting this Titan thing don't really like the humans because of the potential of what they could do. And obviously there's a point that they refer to that when the aliens met the humans, it changed the world and the aliens were in space and stuff, but like what happened? Seems like there's an interesting thing that they know humans are dangerous. I know humans are dangerous and stuff, and you know, most movies do that thing and whatever, but like there seems to have been a specific reason and why they exactly think that, why they don't want humanity to have another Earth, and what exactly was going on there. And it probably would have made this a lot more interesting than like, there's a lot of scenes where like, we must kill all humans, and I'm like, okay, I get you're like bad aliens and shit, and that's cool, but like maybe do something interesting with the bad guys. They're not particularly great. This film combines 2D animation with CG animation. That's the interesting thing about this period as well, and why I kind of compare it to Dinosaurs. Dinosaur combines things that are shot with like live action backgrounds and then animating on top of this, and Titan A.E. combines like 2D animation, which you typically kind of character designs you expect from a Don Bluth film, with CG animation and CG backgrounds in certain cases. Most of it's Don Bluth stuff. The CG backgrounds with the Don Bluth animation is an interesting idea, and something that I'm glad they were actually doing something and pushing the medium forward. I think that's a cool idea actually, in terms of saying like, hey, it'd be cool if we do these things. I don't know if it really works, and the villains aren't very distinctive. It's an ugly design, and having them not have any character or real reason to go after the humans doesn't really help this film, especially when it feels like there are maybe interesting ideas buried within it, particularly like having the guy Bill Pullman voices switching sides. Like there didn't feel like there was that much development there. It also felt like the camera was moving in ways that don't necessarily show exactly what's going on in Titan A.E. You can't really see what's going on in certain action sequences, and even that animation isn't great. So what you're seeing is very flawed film, and it's also trying to do the Star Wars thing, but not as clearly. I reviewed Star Chaser, The Story of Orin, I think was the name, last year around Star Wars. I kind of like reviewing animated space drama kind of movies before Star Wars movies. This seems to suffer almost the same fate as Star Chaser, where it like complicates too many things and takes ideas certainly, but doesn't understand the clarity of Star Wars, and almost believes in this plot so much. It's like, oh, we have this amazing plot that it's gonna so work, so we don't really need to rely on character, even though like one of the most famous moments from A New Hope is Luke Skywalker looking out at those moons and thinking about, you know, moving on and going into space and moving on with his life and not being stuck on this farm town. It's a very relatable human moment, and it's a thing that builds character with you, and Titan A.E. has like none of that. And what's interesting is I think it's funny that it has like the basic structure of Star Wars, and it could clearly place that in there fairly easily, but for whatever reason they don't. I don't know if this is Don Bluth's fault, or Gary Goldman, who helped direct this with him, or 20th Century Fox, or the script had just been twisted and turned around so many times nobody clearly could figure out what to do with it. There's always talk of like this being remade into a live action film, and I think you could plausibly do that in an interesting way, and actually like this is something I could see you remaking into something interesting if you fully fleshed out the villain and things like that. But Titan A.E. unfortunately doesn't do that at all, and what you get is just kind of this mishmash of cool, kind of interesting animation, and it does have that feel of what I love about what has certainly ended now that we have so many different animation studios, is having an animated film be this kind of unique product of this is the only sort of thing like this. Don Bluth has done things with computers, and certainly Dragon's Lair with video games, and certainly things like that, but there's only one big studio animated film that combined Don Bluth's animation with computer generated imagery. They wanted to make an animated film that appealed more to teens. Teens were becoming a much more bigger demographic again, certainly with the millennials growing in numbers at that time. That's why you had so many teen comedies at that time, because there were so many kids becoming teens, having more dispensable income. And I think Titan A.E. kind of tries to do something that they did with 80s animated films, with things like Black Cauldron and Star Chaser and what Ralph Bakshi did, and try to make films that will appeal to them. Titan A.E. failed spectacularly. I don't remember too much buzz about it, but I think the problem was is all the ads had those annoying songs I was already sick of hearing already, and so I didn't see it just because I was a snooty teenager. But I don't think had I seen this would it be that much better. I think there are certain cool sequences. The opening sequence I think is really cool. It has this kind of surreal element, like a child's version of them leaving Earth, and like his interpretation of it almost has a dream quality, like he's remembering it or something, which I thought was actually really cool. I like that Ron Perlman's only in that part, unfortunately, and some of the voice acting's semi alright in certain places, seeing Tone Loc and Matt Damon and Bill Pullman's alright. The script just doesn't really give them enough to really give a really great performance. But I think Titan A.E. is kind of a product of its time, and of its time wasn't as well defined in terms of animation as what a studio would do in the early 90s, which was sort of make like a Disney thing or let Don Bluth do his own thing. This doesn't feel as much like Don Bluth to me. It's one of his few that isn't a musical. He's not a huge sci-fi fan, but I think it was kind of a cool idea to like have Don Bluth make a space opera kind of a thing. I know anime was growing and studios were a little nervous about that, so I think they were kind of reacting to a lot of different things and saving their ass because they had already spent $30 million in development. This film is often said to have cost a lot more than it really was. It only cost about $70, which is pretty good for an animated film, but because development cost is factored into your final budget, in Titan A.E. it had to eat $30 million that was spent before Don Bluth was even, you know, brought in to even talk about it, which is a little unfair. This movie flopped so hard it really didn't matter if it had an extra $30 million. It just kind of hurt them even more and gave them another case to close Fox Animation Studios, and thus Don Bluth couldn't direct again because Hollywood's unfair and so is life and society in general. It's an interesting kind of weird footnote in animation. I think this period really is, and probably the one that everyone really remembers and loves is like the Iron Giant. I think could have only happened a year before all this because everyone was like, what do we do now? I don't know. Animation's a little up in the air. There's not a blueprint. This seems cool. Let's do it. After this, Shrek came out the following year, and then Ice Age happened, and actually Blue Sky started their relationship with 20th Century Fox by working on a sequence in Titan A.E., interestingly enough. I think the footnote of this is interesting. I think maybe Dinosaurs is better. This is probably on the lower end of that because it's honestly not very good. Storytelling's very weak. It's probably the worst Don Bluth movie I've ever seen, and I'm not necessarily sure if that's his fault or not. I didn't read interviews with him on the subject, but I don't think he did a very good job of just simply telling the story. Animation-wise, it's actually pretty cool to look at, but in terms of a movie or trying to act like this is some underappreciated cult movie or something, which I keep finding articles about, I'm sorry, no. It's just not very good. I wish a film written by Ben Edlund and Joss Whedon had been really cool, that was directed by Don Bluth and had some cool people working on it, had ended up to be the awesome space opera I really wanted in 2000, but it didn't. And instead, much like a commercial with a shitty Creed song, it ended up being something that was mostly forgotten, and probably for a good reason, because Titan A.E. as a film in itself is not that remarkable. It's just remarkable that this kind of a film got made in and it's a kind of weird mix of various different animation styles to make a unique big studio action adventure sci-fi movie, which we don't really ever see very much of. And I think that's cool enough that Titan A.E. happened. I just don't really enjoy actually watching what happened itself. Alright, so if you have seen Titan A.E. and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. A.E.